Oh, congratulations, John, on this. I just loved your performance. It just felt like you so fully embodied him, and I kept sort of not seeing you there and just seeing Joe, which was amazing. And I knew that I was going to laugh a lot, but I hadn't expected there to be so many touching and poignant moments in this. And I just want to give me a bit of an insight to what your pathway to playing Joe was.
Well, Eitan Frankel, the showrunner, created this blueprint, this map of the basic events, but also the backstory. So, unlike the docuseries, you really get into what these two characters had to go through and how they reacted. You know, in some ways, both of them are aspirational characters who triumphed over a lot of abuse and homophobia and misogyny and AIDS, and it was just like a minefield for them. And they created their own kingdoms instead of running away to the big city like most queer people do. Like Joe stayed and made his own kingdom of misfits, misfit animals, misfit people, and it felt like a kind of wonderful sanctuary. And then it starts to curdle, because if you really got beat up that much, the danger is that you start beating up somebody else that doesn't deserve it. And Carole became the focus of that. He's a relentless self-promoter, like Hedwig and like other queer, survivors or queer icons. They came from adversity, and they're like, no one's going to tear me down again, right? But the danger is that your confidence curdles into narcissism and paranoia. But what a great, delicious role to play all those things.
Absolutely. And I know you grew up in a similar region, but were there any other sort of personal connections that helped you as you were, preparing your portrayal of him?
Well, like I said, when you're queer, you have a few options. You can either keep your head down and, be the hairdresser in town and just get on with it. Or you go to the big city and you find your community, or you do the third way, which is create your own community in that rural place. And I do the same with my plays, with my movies, with my projects. I bring in people. Our projects tend to be temporary, and they decay before they become unhealthy. I think when things last too long, there's infighting and hierarchy. But I like the idea of temporary communities, that keep springing up, and you work with a group of people over and over, but in different configurations. His lasted a little too long in a certain configuration and led to disaster. Carole was part of that, and Carole's own reputation was in tatters too since then. So there's a complexity about these two people who could have been friends in another life. But I do relate to Joe a lot, and as has been reminded of today, he's very similar to another character I play, which is Hedwig, another blonde-wigged victim who triumphs over their adversity, but also can be very bitter and recriminatory. Hedwig breaks the cycle of abuse. Joe doesn't. That's the difference.
And there's obviously a wealth of footage out there of Joe. And I mean, you portray him from kind of the 80s up until pretty much, close to present day. So what was your approach to absorbing some of that? And I guess you probably found quite different Joes as you looked into all the footage and different aspects of, his life, because we get to see the personal Joe and the very much like the showman Joe.
Yeah, I mean, I moved around a lot as a kid, which I changed my accent to fit in, so that's why I became an actor and interested in different cultures and milieus and people. I'm a very curious person. And he obviously presents a lot of personas throughout his life. We don't see all of them on his videos. We try to imagine what they would be in this series. What is he like alone with his husband? We know what he's like in front of an audience, but what is the vulnerable side? There's one tape of him in the 90s where he's very different than you see him later. He's soft-spoken, has a bit of a lisp, he's very sweet and humble. And I was like, wow, that's what he was like before life beat him up and gave him a calloused skin. So I always had to remind myself that that kid is still in there. And then it becomes layered rather than just a kind of loud, drag-like character.
And I mean, I feel like, as you touched on, whatever anyone, whatever other views you might have of him, I think you can't but admire how open he is about his queerness and his polyamory, and just, you know, that the wedding that we see recreated in the series with those pink shirts and his mom's there and everything. And I don't know if you just want to touch a bit more on that aspect of him, because it's, you know, it's pretty incredible. As you say, he's far from Hell's Kitchen or West Hollywood.
Yeah, he's making his own queer friendly community, and people responded to that. You know, every rural place has the misfits. You know, I grew up in a small town in Kansas partially, and my friend Bridget Everett is on the show Somebody Somewhere on HBO, and she goes back to Manhattan, Kansas, which is right where I lived, and finds her little community there unexpectedly. Every town has the interesting people who couldn't get out or decided not to, but they create their own little spaces. And those are the most interesting people in the world, because they have the down-home charm and kindliness, but they don't swallow the, you know, the Kool-Aid either. They're not fully sheep. You know, they've created the unwanted animals zoo of their own that they rule. Joe felt like he was doing the same, you know, with ex-cons and rehab people and down and outers, many of whom are dealing with many problems. In one way, he thinks he's taking care of them, and in another way, he's controlling them. After his first husband died of AIDS, he gravitated towards down and out guys who didn't necessarily identify as queer. Partially, I'm sure that's what he grew up with, you know, those were the boys he liked, but also they can't challenge him. You know, his first husband could. His first husband was Daddy. He had his own addiction problems, but he took care of Joe. Later, Joe wanted to take care of them, which meant, in his view, also control them a bit. So there's a double-edged sword there. But again, all the layers make it really fun to play.
And a lot of fun to watch too. Well, John Cameron Mitchell, thanks very much, and congratulations on Joe versus Carole.
You're welcome. Take care.
Thanks. Take care. Bye-bye.